open borders, shameful abandonment, disregard for human life, the prospect of more mandates and lockdowns, and the list goes on. Now more than ever, we need to stick together. Voting alone is not enough. We must use our dollars to support like-minded companies that fight for our rights and beliefs. Patriot Mobile is America's only Christian conservative wireless provider who shares your values. Last year, we gave more than $500,000 to conservative causes. With your support, we'll give more than $1.5 million this year. It's time to band together and support companies that truly love America and fight for our freedoms. Will you join us?
This is Kentucky's Voice Radio, covering the latest state and local issues with Tom Fallbush, Bob Scott, and Jim Waters.
Good morning, Kentuckiana. You're listening to Kentucky's Voice. I'm your special host, Dr. Lance Pearson, with the Kentucky Liberty Caucus as well as the Louisville Tea Party. We're happy to have you on this fine Monday. I want to go ahead and talk about all of our media options. You're almost certainly listening to us on 970 AM in the Louisville area, as well as in the collar counties, including southern Indiana, and we appreciate that. That's 970 AM WGTK. We also have a live stream that is on Facebook and on YouTube. So if you just go to the Kentucky's Voice channel on either Facebook or on YouTube, you should be able to find that stream so you can watch the video of this show as well as listen to the audio. On the YouTube channel, we actually archive all of our old videos. So if you go to the live tab, you can find the full-length hour-long video of any of our past shows. And then on the video tab, we tend to clip those up into 10 or 12-minute segments. We also have some shorts that you might see maybe on Facebook, Instagram, maybe TikTok. I think we even have a little bit of an X page. So if you're on social media, you should be able to find our content. Just search for The KY Voice or Kentucky's Voice, and you should be able to locate that. I also want to make a mention of our website. We are a listener-supported radio program. We would appreciate any support that you would be able to give, not only listening, but also if you have some money that's burning a hole in your pocket, we would appreciate either a one-time donation or a monthly donation to keep conservative thought, news, and opinion in the Louisville area on the radio. And we're basically trying to win the war of ideas, and winning any war requires some funds. So we would greatly appreciate that. That's kyvoice.org, kyvoice.org on your web browser. You can also text our text line with the word give, and that will send a link to your phone that you can go to that website by clicking on that link as well. That text number is 502-571-0970. That's 502-571-0970. If you text, I'll do my best to kind of work it into the show, but we usually have some guests that it's hard to integrate those. I do read those messages, however, and some of our other hosts are a little better than I am at getting those on. We welcome your involvement. I hope you're engaged when you're listening to our programming and willing to participate in the conversation, both talking to your friends, but also texting directly into the line. Okay. So let me go ahead and talk about a little bit. Oh, I didn't even mention our television options. We actually have a rebroadcast of this program, the video of the program, on TV. If you have Spectrum TV as your cable provider, you can go to Channel 21 at either 12:30, 4, or 7 p.m. Sometimes my TV guide says 8 p.m. It's actually on at 7 p.m. So 12:30, 4, or 7 p.m. on Channel 21 WBNA. There's a rebroadcast of the show all during the workday, during the work week. That's Monday through Friday. Okay, let's go ahead and transition a little bit into some of the national news and local news before we enter our segment. I do want to go ahead and do an early promo. We're hoping to have State Senator Lindsey Titchener on for the last 3 segments of our show. So definitely stick around to hear some of what's going on both at the federal level. She actually has gone to a couple of national conferences that we want to get an update from her on, as well as some of the work that she's been doing in the interim session about education. So definitely tune in for that. In our first segment, we're going to cover a lot of news about what's happening locally on data centers, on flock cameras, as well as some of the national. This has really picked up steam in the last couple months as we've been covering it heavily. There's been a lot of talk about what national legislation, federal legislation might be in store for both data centers as well as flock cameras. So thank you for joining us on Kentucky's Voice. We'll be right back after the break. I'm your special host, Dr. Lance Pearson.
Kentucky's Voice Radio, online at kyvoice.org.
Welcome back to Kentucky's Voice. Again, I'm your special host, Dr. Lance Pearson, with the Kentucky Liberty Caucus as well as the Louisville Tea Party. You're listening to Kentucky's Voice on 970 AM WGTK. We appreciate your listenership. Let's go ahead and hop into some local issues before later in the show, where we hope to be joined by State Senator Lindsey Titchener. So you'll want to stick around for that. We've got a whole bunch of stuff to talk about with her, and we're not even actually going to deal with any of her reelection. She's in the midst of a reelection campaign. Okay, let me catch you up on some local news. If you have listened to the program, I guess 2 weeks ago, last week I actually had a tire blowout on my drive to the studio, so you got a rebroadcast. Life happens. I apologize for not being on here, but two Mondays ago, we started talking a little bit about a data center that is trying to be put in Mercer County near Harrodsburg, and how a local city there, a city named Bergen, was going to try to annex the property so that the developer of this hyperscale data center could avoid all of the planning and zoning that Mercer County was imposing on the developer. So there was a lot of community pushback. Nevertheless, Harrodsburg is the county seat in Mercer County. So that's where the fiscal court meets, and they establish what their planning and zoning is going to be. The Planning and Zoning Commission in Harrodsburg, Mercer County, actually met on Thursday, July 23rd. I'll try to keep you updated if you want to try to attend similar meetings that are coming forward. Eventually, those planning and zoning has to come before the full fiscal court. However, they always have the final say on almost all zoning regulations. So I'll try to keep you updated on that. The second reading of the Bergen annexation ordinance, where they were trying to take over the property that a developer from Lexington was trying to put this data center on. That second reading was actually canceled. So I'll try to keep you informed about when the next meeting for Bergen City Council is, so that if you're in that area, pretty much anywhere, Lexington, Frankfort, you're not far from it. It's actually very close to the Shaker Village, if you've been in that area. I'll try to keep you informed about when you can go and voice your opinion on that. Another topic that has been very hot in the news is flock cameras. And so there has started to be some pushback among several municipalities. I believe, for example, Macon County, North Carolina, actually decided to end their contract with flock cameras because there was a lot of pushback They had 12 cameras that they were using to monitor their camera. They actually ended their contract ahead of time, so they're going to continue paying Flock until the end of their contract, but just not use any of the information because of so many people that were concerned about these cameras that are capturing, by and large, probably 99% of the people that they're catching the license plate of and the make and model of the car, people driving by. Probably 99% of those people have never done anything wrong, and therefore there's no justifiable reason for them to have any of their information and their movements tracked. That county in North Carolina decided they were going to basically stop using Flock cameras, even though the cameras will continue to operate because they have a contract with Flock Safety, the company that makes those cameras. So they're starting to be pushed back across the country. And let me go ahead and deal with some national issues, one of which is Flock. So if our producer could actually bring up the image that we had of Thomas Massey's comment that he posted on X about pending legislation that he's going to be filing that will withhold federal money from municipalities, i.e. cities, and police departments that deploy Flock and other automatic license plate reader cameras to surveil law-abiding citizens. So Thomas Massey is going to be filing legislation to take away federal money from municipalities and police departments that choose to use these and basically spy on their citizenry. There is also a movement from Tim Burchett, another very good U.S. House member, to file similar legislation, and Representative Self. So there's another legislator who is filing similar legislation. So there's starting to be a groundswell at the national level opposition to using these cameras to spy on people, and I welcome a hearty debate about that. Even if the legislation doesn't pass this session, let's go ahead. This is actually a very serious issue, potential violation of your Fourth Amendment rights against unlawful search and seizure and warrantless spying and surveillance. And so I would love to have a floor debate or even committee debate about the use of these sorts of cameras and speculation about what the Supreme Court is going to do if this comes before them. Couple of other issues at the national level. If our producer could bring up Thomas Massey's resolution to eliminate automatic funding from the budget for support of Israel, basically foreign aid to Israel. So if we could pop up that vote. This vote happened about a week and a half ago. This was Amendment 8 to the National Defense Authorization Act, I believe. And the vote on that was actually very interesting. Thomas Massey was the only Republican to vote yes on this amendment that would have eliminated the automatic foreign aid to Israel, which occurs in about, I think it's $3.5 billion a year. This is separate from some, specific fundings for certain military operations, but the U.S. basically every year gives about $3.5 billion to Israel, which is a thriving economy. The most interesting part of this was this amendment split the Democrat caucus almost right down the middle. As you can see, if you're watching this online, there were 103 yay votes and 98 nay votes among the Democratic constituency. So you can see that funding for Israel, especially as they are trying to control Gaza in what many people call a genocide that they have been conducting there, as well as conducting offensive military operations in Lebanon. The Democratic caucus seems to be split almost straight down the middle in terms of whether or not they support continuing aid to Israel. All right. The next graphic, not that this is entirely an Israeli issue. Thomas Massey opposes foreign aid to any country. So he also filed an amendment to the same bill, and this was to take away the $2 billion a year that we give to Jordan. So the country of Jordan right next to Israel, who's generally a fairly, at least among the Arab states, one of our biggest allies in the region. 6 Republicans voted yay to eliminate that $2 billion in foreign aid to Israel every year. 209 Republicans voted yes, and all 111 Democrats who voted on this voted to oppose ending that $2 billion a year in funding. So don't think that the only foreign aid that we're giving to anyone is Israel. It's certainly not the case. We actually give quite a bit of money to Jordan in particular, as well as Egypt. So nevertheless, it's just an evidence that of just how much money we are spending overseas while we're struggling with some domestic policies. Okay. If we can pop up our next graphic, there's been a ton, our next graphic, which is on the SAVE Act. There's been a lot of talk over the last 6 months, really actually over the last year, about the importance of passing the SAVE Act, which in part would serve to require that non-citizens not be allowed to vote. The Republicans in general have been vocally supportive of this, but they can't bring this to the floor without basically playing hardball and making some modifications to the filibuster in the Senate, because the Democrats have been united in opposition to the SAVE Act. So Thomas Massie actually made a post. This was a little bit after our last show. He made a post where he talked about how voter ID polls very well, and so the GOP is using Democrat intransigence over this to score political points. That's it. This week, we vote on a CR to fund the government through December, which ends the plan to attach the SAVE Act to an appropriations bill. That's a bust. So, in other words, one mechanism that has been proposed for how we get the SAVE Act passed is by putting it into a budget reconciliation or appropriations bill, which in general only require 50 plus 1 vote in the Senate in order to pass. So it needs a constitutional majority. So 50 votes of the 100 plus 1. If there's a tiebreaker, J.D. Vance would be the tiebreaker there. Now, so in order to avoid having to have 60 votes in order to break a filibuster on budget bills, there's already an exception where you don't need to do that. So it's been proposed by multiple people that we put the SAVE Act into a budget bill. And what Thomas Massie was pointing out is while the Republicans have been riling up our listeners and the people that watch Fox News almost exclusively for their information, the proposal that we slip this into a budget bill has just been undercut because the House has filed a CR in order to fund the government for the rest of the year without having the SAVE Act as part of that. So hoping to put this into a budget when you've already funded the budget through the end of the year just undercuts whatever messaging that you were pretending that you were going to get this done through this budget process. Can we put up that last graphic? So Thomas Massie, who, by the way, has already voted twice for the SAVE Act, who generally supports this legislation, but he's just pointing out the hypocrisy and the lies that are being told to the Republican voter. Secure elections is a weapon of mass distraction. The fact that the Republicans have won all of the elections, both for the House, the Senate, the presidency, and they control most of the Supreme Court, belies the fact that since that, they have increased the debt, they've increased spending, they started a war, caused inflation, protected the criminal elite, betrayed...
back to Kentucky's Voice Radio, online at kyvoice.org.
Welcome back to Kentucky's Voice. I'm your special host, Dr. Lance Pearson with the Kentucky Liberty Caucus, as well as the Louisville Tea Party. We hope to be joined slightly later in the show with State Senator Lindsey Titchener, who represents all of Oldham, all of Trimble, and the northeast portion of Jefferson counties, kind of Prospect, Indian Hills, that sort of area. One of the topics that we're going to address with her, if and when we can get her on, is education, which is an issue that she is very passionate about, and I want to give her a chance to basically voice all of the interesting stuff that has been happening during the interim session. So most people know that we have a state legislature that meets early in the year. They then are off for the last 9 or so months of the year. That doesn't mean that nothing is happening. Over the summer, they tend to have what we call interim joint committees, where both the Senate and the House, all the people that are on a particular committee for either of those, either the Senate or the House, they both get together and they have experts come in and testify about what legislation would be interesting, how things are going with the state, so that they can plan what legislation they want to file in the upcoming session, which starts then in January. So one of the most interesting topics that got covered during the interim joint committee on education, which Lindsey Titchener sits on, she's the vice chair of the Senate Education Committee, is addressing a couple of issues related to the use of technology in schools. So I know a lot of parents are very passionate about what technology is being used in the classroom and whether it actually is benefiting kids. So let me go ahead and play about a 4 or 5 minute video. This is from the superintendent, I believe, of Fleming County Schools, who has some innovative approaches on terms of limiting the amount of screen time that children are exposed to in school, and basically being exposed to having Chromebooks and being exposed to technology and computer screens all day, does that actually help them learn? So if our producer could put on that video.
Students are telling us that they want to change in what they're experiencing in the classroom. I think it's important that we listen to them as much as possible. And that's coming from a former career and technical ed teacher, and also an instructional technologist who worked with teachers to integrate technology. I do think that we've got to put limits on technology. We've been a one-to-one district since 2018. Over the past 18 to 20 months, students, through our local accountability advisory council, through the student advisor to the school board, and also with our work with students at the high school in terms of the student council, we're constantly engaging students across the board, trying to figure out, what they need and trying to get their voice. One of the things that students are asking us to do is asking for more authentic learning, more meaningful discussion, collaboration, hands-on experiences, fewer technology-driven assessments, and learning connected to the real world. One of the things that Kentucky has is we have a very robust Kentucky academic standards. Technology should be guided by those academic standards and not vice versa. And somehow we've got that flipped in many cases. So one of the things that I want to go to, and I'll turn it over to Dr. Wilson to talk about Simons Middle School, is really the screen time. So in June, our board passed our first reading of the school board policy. This is coming from, again, students and teachers and parents. This will be the second reading, and we made some modifications. So this is up to 45 minutes per day. We do not require technology usage in the classroom except for state testing or for diagnostic testing, and also interim assessments that we give in reading and math. We're proposing in K-5 up to 45 minutes a day. Again, that's a max. That's in school and after school in terms of homework. 6-8 is up to 60 and 9-12 is up to 90. With high school, we've got to understand that if we cut out all technology, we don't want to also hurt computer programming there. And also a lot of our schools, high schools across Kentucky, for alternative programs, they do use a computerized program. So we have to be balanced in how we address this. And then also, we provided case-by-case instructional waivers where schools have to work with their site-based councils to add extra minutes to a lesson. There is no blanket waivers that we're giving. But also, I know Representative Lewis will understand this, we're also not encouraging death by worksheets either. We really want learning to take place in our classrooms that's more meaningful to students and more relevant, but that also prepares students for the real world.
So as the principal of Simons Middle
we
School,
can cut
I
there,
meet with my
producer. Okay. And so Lindsay, who has just joined us, Lindsay Titchener, state senator for Oldham, Trimble, and the northeast part of Jefferson County. We just got done watching the testimony, I believe, of the superintendent of Fleming County Schools from your interim joint committee. So anyway, I know that you know this very well. That was a very passionate speech that he gave that got a lot of publicity actually in the media. Did you have any commentary on that? I was going to actually read your own. You wrote an op-ed about this general topic about limiting screen time among kids. So, but let me go ahead and let you just vocalize that yourself. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think this is past time to deal with this issue. Obviously, once COVID came along, we saw a one-on-one device need, and it never went away. And now we have every student that goes through any testing of our academic standards, they have to do their testing all online, even K through 12. There's no exceptions for that. And what we've really seen and what we heard in the testimony, which I just encourage everybody to go back and watch that entire committee was great. But about the last hour and a half was testimony on screen time. We have decades now of data that is proving a lowering of test scores, and really the factor that's connecting that is the amount of screen time and technology that's being utilized for instruction as a way to instruct students how to learn. Instead of being instructed on how to use technology, we're letting technology do the teaching, and it's really not showing positive results for our kids, and it's something we need to pull back very quickly. And we're seeing other countries around the world doing the same thing as we realize tech isn't really meant to do that, and our brains aren't built to receive knowledge that way.
Right. And so if you want to find that op-ed, just search online for Putting Students Before Screens by Senator Lindsay Titchener. In your op-ed, you tie this together with your legislation that you filed. I guess you probably filed it 3 sessions ago, maybe 2 sessions ago, but related to cursive handwriting and returning cursive to schools. Can you talk about what the connection is there?
Yeah, absolutely. Really, the brain is just built to receive knowledge in a way that's hands-on. And when we pulled cursive out, came through in 2010 with Common Core, when we pulled that out, we took away an element that really helps kids retain knowledge. It helps with memory. It helps with motor skills. It helps with literacy, spelling, so many things. And we tried to say that typing was the same on a computer. Typing is the same as using your hands and accessing the muscles and the brain waves and everything that connects that skill of cursive writing. And it's really proven. We have tests and lots of data that shows also that cursive works as well to help with those things, and in a much better way to help kids retain knowledge and understand. And when you look at screens and learning through screens, it's the same thing. You're taking away that physical writing on paper, holding a book, scanning a page, and instead we're just constantly flipping through this this space that exists on a device and not necessarily something that you can hold, and there's value in that. So I think there's a strong connection to just the very basics of education and writing and reading books and doing your math on paper and not on a device that really I think catapult us back to where we were in learning before technology became so invasive.
Right. It's almost like instead of teaching kids how to read books, we're teaching them how to doom scroll. They just scroll
Yes.
on their phones. All right,
Yeah.
Join us right after the break. We'll be on with Lindsay Titchener.
Now, back to Kentucky's Voice Radio, online at kyvoice.org.
Welcome back to Kentucky's Voice. I'm your special host, Dr. Lance Pearson with the Kentucky Liberty Caucus, as well as the Louisville Tea Party. I'm joined by a very honored guest, State Senator Lindsay Titchener of all of Oldham, all of Trimble, and Northeast Jefferson County. She's got a very spirited reelection campaign that she's in the middle of, but we're not going to talk about that in this show. We'll bring her back on for that. Right now, we're talking about probably the issue she's most passionate about. I don't want to speak for her, but generally education policy, and in particular, the topic that we're talking about is the amount of screen time that kids K through 12 are being exposed to, more or less being educated by a computer screen. How well does that go? So during the interim joint committee on education, which Lindsay is on, she's the vice chair of the Senate Education Committee, they had a testimony from an expert by the name of Dr. Horvath, who wrote a book called The Digital Delusion, and Lindsay brought him in to testify before the committee. I encourage you to find that testimony, the full testimony, because it was pretty riveting. But we've got about a 2-minute clip that we want to hear that's kind of like his overview. So can we play that, producer?
Ourselves through COVID. It was a Band-Aid. And unfortunately, when COVID ended, we didn't rip that Band-Aid off. And we just kept going blindly, just like we were with during COVID. I don't think that the issue is we stop teaching tech. Like Emily said, we need to learn about tech. But the issue becomes we've got to recognize that digital technology, by and large, is an expert production tool. Digital technology helps experts do their jobs easier. That's why they call it efficiency tools. But the tools experts use to make their lives easier are not the tools a novice needs to learn how to become an expert. When they use efficiency tools while learning, they don't learn anything. They produce some stuff, which is usually middling, but they don't have any idea why it happened, where it happened, or when it happened. So I think we could spend the next 10 years trying to train teachers how to use tech better, trying to teach kids how to use tech better. But the joke is there is no better. That should have been the research they did before giving us these products. Here's how to use it. But B, the reason why after 10 years, 20 years, we still haven't found an answer because it just doesn't seem to be good for learning. That's not why they were developed. That's not what we should do. So my argument is, yeah, as they get older and they start to develop more expertise, we can start to introduce it a bit more. But I don't think it's a training issue. I just think it's a developmental issue.
Okay.
We got to keep going here, Representative Jackson.
So we heard from Dr. Horvath again. He's the author of The Digital Delusion. What was your thoughts on his whole testimony, but particular the little segment we had there about how maybe these AI tools and these digital tools that, make it much easier for an expert to, can craft a document may not be equally beneficial to a novice who's just learning how to make a document on their own. So can you comment on that?
Right.
Yeah.
Well, I think if we're not careful there in laying a very strong foundation of knowledge, we create a generation that's entirely reliant on using technology to claim their intelligence when really it's just propped up by a tool. And if you think about when he was saying that, it made me think about these experts that are developing the programs for educational tech. They all learned on books and pen and paper. If you think about the Elon Musks, you think about, the brilliant leaders in technology of our day, they all learned the traditional way. They didn't learn on a device, right? And now they're building the devices because they had that foundational knowledge of being able to process information, being able to retain knowledge, being able to think through and critically think through a problem, as opposed to just using technology as a crutch to develop the skills that they have. So I would encourage anybody to read that book. It was absolutely fascinating. And one of the arguments, I'll just keep going if you don't mind.
Yeah, sure.
One of the arguments is that we have to teach kids for the day that we live in, right? We have so much advanced technology with AI coming. And my pushback on that is, okay, rewind 10 years ago, we were telling every kid starting at first and second grade, they had to learn how to code, right? So we kind of reshaped education to teach kids how to code because that was the new up and coming thing. Well, now AI codes. So we all of that skill set that we gave these kids is not all going to be completely necessary because coding is now being taken care of by the newest technology.
That's right.
So what will it be after AI if we focus so heavily on AI? The next thing will come and that knowledge will become irrelevant as well. So I think we just have to be careful. We have thousands of years of tried and true knowledge based on basic skills. And once we learn those basic skills, then you open up the doorway to retain and learn more knowledge that creates, the pathway for your future. And then you can become an expert in whatever field you have that knowledge in.
Absolutely. Okay. And so I agree with all of that. I think this is, going to be a hot topic in the coming legislature. Do you see some sort of legislation that might mandate maybe a maximum amount of screen time, kind of like what Fleming County did? Or do you think we're not quite there yet? It just might get discussed.
Well,
yeah,
I hope we're there. And when I filed my legislation last session to limit screen times, I just grabbed a bill that I found. I wanted to get the conversation started. And sometimes that's part of the process of when you file legislation. What got the conversation started was when I put it on another bill to try and kill that bill. And then people saw it. So now here we are. We have this conversation started. And I think you're right. We'll begin the process. I hope we're able to come to some type of agreement as a legislative body that we need to address this issue and we do it quickly because our kids are the ones who are losing in this. When you look at his opening statements of his testimony, he said, this is the first generation that has ever had a lower IQ than prior generations. Wow. In history, every generation is getting smarter and smarter and smarter. Well, this one isn't because we've handed them devices and turned their knowledge over to a machine and we're not made that way. Right. So I'm hoping we will get something in place. My goal at minimum is to address K through 5. Those are obviously the years where you gain the skill set to do basic math, to critically think, to learn how to read and develop those literacy skills. And But I also want to look at let's get some books in kids' hands on a required basis. We do a lot of learning in higher grades with just excerpts of books and not necessarily reading an entire book. And I think that's also a way that we're robbing from a child's education, even at the higher levels.
Right. Now, somewhat related, there was a bill filed, I think 2 years ago, sponsored by Josh Bray, but a lot of people worked on the bill that limited the amount of access to cell phones that kids had in school.
Right.
Are you hearing any positive or negative feedback from schools about that legislation and how it's impacting life in school? There was a little testimony from Fleming County that we cut off about that, but I found it very interesting.
Yeah, well, before that, we actually had a school in JCPS. I feel like it was Fern Creek High School that pulled them out before the bill passed, and they said it's just been a night and day difference. One of the things that I wasn't super happy about with that legislation when it finished was that we gave more decision making to the local districts.
Right, it was optional.
To say how, it was optional, but I think parents are really demanding it, and which is always one of the arguments. Parents want to get in touch with their kids. Well, parents can call the office and get in touch with their kids. They don't need to be on their devices. But I think the teachers are really loving having their students' attention again because it's so easy. And especially with Chromebooks, these kids navigate through, they're on their apps, they're playing games. It's just as much of a distraction as a cell phone. So I think we've cut out one bad part of tech in our kids' hands during the school day. Now we need to really focus on the other one as well.
Right. Now, I will probably have her on this show at some point, but I was just at 2 meetings at which Kentucky Auditor Allison Ball spoke. And one of the things that she spoke about is that a lot of the Chromebook, the one-to-one Chromebook movement, whatever, was really spurned by COVID. Google basically gave a bunch of schools great deals or even donated a bunch of these Chromebooks to various schools, but that they are now running out. I mean, a laptop doesn't last forever. It's not a school building. It's going to last 70 years. It lasts like 3 or 4 years, and we're getting to that where a lot of these are going to be, basically becoming unusable, and schools are going to have to decide, are we going to keep Chromebooks around? What are your kind of thoughts? Like, does it make sense to re-up on this Chromebook fascination with all the associated costs, or would it be better to just let's go back more towards traditional education and teaching kids how to think?
Yeah, no, I'm not a fan of re-upping. I mean, this is the perfect time. If devices are going bad, let's move on from them. One of the parts of Dr. Horvath's testimony was kind of, how did this come about? And he said, well, basically, they created a product that couldn't sell. And that was the Chromebook. And so then they turned to education and found the marketplace for it. And that, obviously they marketed very well. And then COVID came along and it became just pervasive throughout all of our education system. So I talked to a school board member about this just this week, and she said they are looking at their replacement costs for one of their districts or one of their schools, $400,000. So when you think about that on a broader scale, that was a smaller district. Think about that on a broader school scale across the state, the number is going to be quite astronomical. So I say, let's scrap them. Let's put that money instead back into textbooks. Where did all the textbooks go? When you think we used to have one for every student, for every grade across the state, every subject, let's look at getting those back into kids' hands, because that's really how they learn best.
Right. Now, one last point on that interim joint committee on education. There was some commentary that Dr. Horvath got roped into. Kevin Jackson, who is a big proponent of the public school system, tried to get Dr. Horvath to basically undermine virtual learning. And so I'm no fan of virtual learning in general, like the, what was it, Do Not Learn? The days, there was some acronym for these special NTI days. So it's non-teaching. So anyway, having kids that are doing fine in school instead learn from home, where they probably are putting in 1 hour worth of work, that's obviously not a great idea. But there are a lot of kids who are bullied at school, who basically don't have a learning environment, that those can be very beneficial. Did you have any comment about that as far as virtual education?
Yeah, I'm not a fan of NTI at all, but that's not all necessarily virtual. It really comes down to, is there someone instructing that student?
Right.
I think self-led instruction at a certain age can be done well, but in younger grades, they need a teacher, even if it is virtual, but they need a teacher.
Okay, join us after the break. We'll talk about some conferences that Lindsay's attended.
Now, back to Kentucky's Voice Radio, online at kyvoice.org.
Welcome back to Kentucky's Voice. I'm your special host, Dr. Lance Pearson with the Kentucky Liberty Caucus as well as the Louisville Tea Party. You're likely listening on 970 AM WGTK. I want to remind our listeners and viewers that there are live streams going on right now on Kentucky's Voice channels on Facebook or YouTube. You can also go to YouTube for our archive videos, both of full-length videos as well as each of these segments clipped up in a few days. You also have the opportunity to watch this if you are a Spectrum cable subscriber. If you go to Channel 21 WBNA at 12:30, 4, or 7 p.m. tonight, you'll be able to catch the video of this. You can also text in your questions at 502-571-0970. We have been joined for the last two segments by State Senator Lindsay Titchener, who represents Northeast Jefferson County, all of Oldham, and all of Trimble. She represents the whole state, frankly, because all of the legislators are making legislation that applies to the whole state. So you basically, Lindsay, you have been to a couple of conferences. We've tried to have you on a couple times to kind of get your feedback about what happened in those. But first, let me hear about the White House Legislative Conference or Committee. I'm not sure what the C stands for, but a meeting that you had at the White House for state legislators to talk about policy and what the Trump administration and, basically what the federal government and how it interacts with the state. So can you just talk a little bit about that conference? What were your takeaways?
Yeah, that was this is one of the first times they've ever done this in any administration. So they've been pulling in legislative members from various states that are Republican leaning, because we have a Republican president right now. And bringing in some of their heads of agencies so that we can discuss various topics and update us. And then they all took questions from us so that we could get some answers and they can get to work on some stuff. So while we were there, various members, there were about 34 legislators that went. And we were able to, I set up a few meetings, met with somebody at HHS, met with somebody at the education department. But those members came in and spoke to us. Highlights were hearing from Robert F. Kennedy Jr. and really honing in on the MAHA movement and looking at what is happening to our kids and how sick our kids are with chronic disease, and trying to connect some dots. And they're doing such great work, and Kentucky's doing great work on that issue as well. So it was really impactful for me. Met with Senator Funky Fromeyer, with somebody from the Department of Health and Human Services, to share what we're doing, and really trying to build a partnership so that we can benefit as much as possible from what the federal government can provide to work on MAHA issues, and then they can learn from us and what we're doing on our MAHA, make Kentucky healthy again. So then we heard from Dr. Oz talking a ton about Medicaid and the Medicaid fraud, and where we are as far as the looking at the fraud and waste and abuse that's happening within Medicaid, and which we've just seen balloon since COVID, and really trying to scale that back and figure out what's really going on. And of course, we know from our amazing auditor, she's been able to uncover almost $1 billion in fraud, waste, and abuse within our own state system. So trying to figure out, okay, what do we need to look out? Here's what the federal government's looking at, across the nation. How can we hone in on that same area and really focus to make sure we're protecting those Medicaid dollars, make sure that they're going to who it's intended to, and not just flittering away, out of state or to illegals or to programs that don't really exist, which we're seeing in Kentucky and also in across the country as well. So it was a really very important meeting. I was very excited to be a part of it and just take notes and learn from some of our leaders. And I can't express how valuable our leaders are in our different agencies. I think Trump has done a tremendous job at his appointments over all of our agencies, and learning from them. I hope they stay in place a long time and continue to fulfill the work that they've started.
Right. And so just a reminder, Kentucky is a recipient state. As far as donor versus recipient, we receive way more from the federal government than we actually pay in through taxes. And so figuring out what that federal government is doing, how much money we can expect for various programs, where the legislative focus at the federal level is so that we can calibrate our state legislature, it's crucial. And so thank you for attending that conference. Now, you just got, literally probably yesterday, you just got back from another conference called the ALEC conference, or ALEC, the American Legislative Exchange Council. So can you just tell us a little bit about that organization and then what came out of that conference?
Yeah, it's a great organization, great conference. Really, we hone in on conservative policy. So it's one of those conferences where you can really sit down with some of your colleagues in other states and kind of hash out all on the same page, essentially, but really get into the nitty gritty of how to push through some great conservative policy. I will say the highlight in Washington, D.C. at that White House briefing, along with this one and every conference I've been to, has been on energy and the data centers and the AI push that's coming through. This conference, we talked a lot about that. We had some interesting speakers on that. And, as I'm serving, I just posted about this on my Facebook page, serving on a working group about energy reliability and supply. And obviously, it's all surrounding the AI data centers, the hyperscales, and what that's going to look like and how that's going to reshape more or less the new roadway of technology, if you will. And I think one of the things I'm paying attention to is that we make sure we're listening to the people on this, because these are coming into our communities. These are
Right.
going to have an impact on energy, on water, on just the feel of your community, and on agricultural land, on environment, all of those things. They do make a huge impact. We know that from other data centers, that hyperscale data centers that are around. So trying to get ahead of that, trying to make sure we're listening, trying to make sure we have in place guardrails to make sure our communities aren't railroaded. And every community that you hear about in Kentucky that has one proposed, they do feel like they're being railroaded. So how do we
Right.
get around that? How do we get control of that so that these data centers, they're coming, we can't stop them. So how do we do it right? How do we make sure
Right.
they're placed in the right place, and we're protecting our energy ratepayers and our communities? It's a big issue. It's the hot topic. I was really disappointed we didn't pass any legislation last session. We had a
Right.
couple of bills that were filed that would have put some good safeguards in place. So I think we're at a point right now where we realize we absolutely have to shore some of this up before it gets out of hand. Because, I mean, quite simply, the number of data centers that are coming our way, we do not have the energy in the state of Kentucky to meet the demand. And our timelines need to line up before we start moving forward with these huge build outs of these
Right.
facilities. Otherwise, we're going to get ourselves into some trouble.
Right. Now, when you said that they're coming and there's nothing that we can do to stop them, as a general industry, I agree. Individual communities, however, have been
Yes.
able to stop them, and hopefully
Yes.
they will
Yeah.
continue to. If it
Yeah.
doesn't fit the community and the community doesn't want it, go ahead and engage your local politicians, your fiscal court, your city councils, and make sure that you push back against these things. There are many places in the state where these make a lot of sense. There was actually a proposal, I believe in Jenkins, Kentucky, like in eastern Kentucky. I think there's lots of places in eastern Kentucky where this would really boost the tax pace. They are not densely populated. There are a lot of places where these make a lot of sense. Maybe even in Carroll County, where there was I think it was a $9.6 billion proposed data center. Now, I don't know the specifics of it, but it's quite possible that makes sense for Carroll County. Other communities, it doesn't make sense. So
Absolutely.
One in particular topic that you really have been emphasizing is the need for these large energy consumers to actually pay for the cost for infrastructure upgrades, especially electrical infrastructure upgrades, and to not pass on the cost of that increased energy production on to residential or to small business consumers. Rather, the data center themselves need to pay for the cost for the expanded energy that they need. So talk a little bit about that as an example. I know the Trump administration has been proposing this pledge that utility companies and big tech just agree not to pass on. I don't trust any of that. I want to see a law in place. I don't trust either of those groups. Yeah.
No. When there's money on the line and when there's such a need for power, I mean, these things are such behemoths and energy hogs. They're going to do what they need to sustain themselves. And
That's right.
If we don't have something in black and white on paper that holds them accountable, it definitely is going to lean in their favor and not ours. So, I think about this energy push and need for energy. We looked at just over the last decade or so, the alternative forms of energy, which really was more for the green movement.
Yep.
And we watched communities lose thousands of acres in solar and wind turbines coming in, right? That really cause more of an environmental impact than, saving a little bit of
fossil fuel,
fuels and all of that with coal and natural gas. But, we're looking into nuclear, which is really a relatively clean form of fuel and can be incredibly efficient. And Paducah is leading the way on that. We've passed several pieces of legislation to open up that process. And I think we're going to see once nuclear comes on board, it's going to be a game changer for not just for AI, but in the data centers, but for us, for all of the ratepayers across the state. I think we're going to see a lot of, I hope we're going to see rates lower, not the way they were promised to be lowered with solar or wind or anything like that.
Right.
But it's going to take some time. I think we're about a decade out is what they're projecting.
Right.
So again, like matching up the timeline of these development of these data centers with the development of nuclear to be able to sustain it's very important. Now the money behind it, if they the data centers are providing the money to get that built out and that infrastructure of nuclear built out, they've got the funds to be able to do that in a more efficient way, and maybe they'll come on faster.
Okay. I want to thank Lindsay Titchener for joining, State Senator Lindsay Titchener for joining us. It was a riveting conversation. We could have had 4 hours worth of conversation on this. Go to TitchenerforSenate.com.